this video. I'm Miki and today I want to show you how to paint a winter sunset using watercolor. For this painting I'm using cold press watercolor paper. It's 100% cotton and 300 GSM, a mechanical pencil, masking tape, a size 8 round brush, a large brush to wet the paper, a small brush for the acrylic paint, a very thin brush for details, a precision knife, tweezers, white acrylic paint with high coverage, and the watercolor palette. I'm taping the paper down with masking tape. I'm using a wider one so it holds really well. We'll be working with a lot of water in this painting and I want the paper to stay flat and secure. Plus, it gives us a nice clean border at the end. I like to keep a piece of scrap paper nearby to test my color mixes and remove extra paint from the brush when it's too loaded. For the sketch, I'm using a mechanical pencil because it gives me thinner lines and I just like it more. I begin on the left side sketching the snowy bank and leave the river in the middle. Along the edge, I add a few jagged uneven shapes. I don't want the shoreline to look flat because in nature it's never perfectly straight. Then I do the same on the right side and I'm keeping the perspective in mind. In the distance the two banks almost meet and as we come closer to the bottom of the paper they slowly spread farther apart. Now I'm adding a few little grass stems in the foreground, just thin lines to give the snow some texture. I draw them bigger and longer in the front and as they go into the distance I make them smaller. I place the main trees, the right one is closer so it's taller and thicker. The left one sits farther apart so it's smaller. In the background I'm placing a few pine trees. I'm not drawing them in detail, I'm just marking where they will go with a few simple lines. And I add a few more grass stems. And the sketch is done. I lightly erase the stronger pencil lines. I want the sketch to stay very soft so it doesn't show through the watercolor. I'm using masking tape to protect the snow areas because I want them to stay bright white and untouched by paint. I start by taping the edges where the snow connects to the river and the line where it meets the sky. I do the same on the right side. I've tried masking fluid before, but mine tends to stain the paper or damage it when I remove it, so if you have a masking fluid brand that doesn't do that, please let me know in the comments. Now I'm using a precision knife to cut the tape along my sketch lines. This part takes a bit of patience, but it gives a clean edge. This tape is very gentle and not too sticky, so it doesn't damage the paper when I peel it off. I'm peeling off the extra tape. This part is so satisfying. I'll let you enjoy this step. Now I'm preparing the colors for the sky and the river. I start with a bit of yellow. This one is Gamboge yellow. Then I add a touch of vermilion. This feels a little too orange, so let's try cadmium red instead. That's perfect. And I also take some ultramarine blue. Now I'm adding just a tiny bit of Payne's gray into each mix. I'm not trying to make the colors dark, I just want to slightly mute them. Payne's gray takes away the vibrant look and it helps all the colors feel more natural and connected. I add a little into the yellow as well. Okay, that was a bit too much, but no worries, I'll just add a bit more yellow. And now it's perfect. Now I'm wetting the paper using a large flat brush. I'm trying to cover the entire sky area and the river as well. I have a little too much water here, so I dry my brush and leave the excess. Now we can start adding the colors. I place the yellow along the horizon line and add the same yellow in the river for the reflection. Next I add the red. And again a little in the river to mirror that warm glow. I take ultramarine blue. I start at the top where I want the color to be stronger. and I pull it down softly so it fades into the warm area. I also add a bit of blue at the bottom of the river to balance the reflection. To make the transition smoother, I clean the brush and gently blend the edges so we get a soft gradient. And I deepen the top with a little more blue. I'm peeling off the rest of the masking tape. And we are left with a perfectly clean snow area. Now I'm going to let this layer dry really well. For the snow, I take a bit of cerulean blue and a little ultramarine blue. I clean my brush really well and I add plenty of white to lighten the mix. I test the color. It's a bit too dark, so I add more white. I think it's okay. Let's see it on the paper. It still needs to be slightly darker. And now it's perfect. I unload the brush on my scrap paper. Then I start placing soft snow shadows. I paint along the shoreline to create volume so it looks like the snow sits slightly above the water, not on the same flat level. Here I soften the color with a clean damp brush, moving it left and right to blend it gently. I do the same on the right side as well. I add a little shadow at the base of the tree and along a few edges. And I place a few light shadows where the pine trees will be. Now I take a bit of Payne's Gray and I start adding shadows in the water. Right under the snow layer, I paint a thin line along the river path. This helps separate the snow from the water and gives the edge more depth. Then I clean my brush, take some clean water and gently pull the color downward to create a soft gradient so the shadow blends into the river. I do the same on the right side as well. Where the bank rises like a small hill, I don't paint the top edge because that's where the light hits. I only place the dark shadow underneath where the snow will naturally cast shade on the water. Now it's time for the pine trees. I'm mixing viridian green, a darker green, and a touch of gray. I want a deep muted green because this is a sunset scene. The sun is behind the trees, so from our point of view they are mostly in shadow. For each pine I start with a simple straight line for the trunk. Then I tap the brush to the left and to the right to create the branches. Nothing is calculated here, just quick loose tapping motions. I paint a few on the left side. Then I do the same on the right. And I add one slightly closer to us. Now I deepen the mix a little more to add shadows. For the shadows I use the same tapping motion, but I try not to cover the first layer completely. I place the darker color mostly underneath the branches and toward the lower part of the tree to create depth and volume. Now I'm mixing a darker color for the rocks in the water. I take a bit of gray, ultramarine blue, and a touch of ivory black. I added a little too much water at first, so I mix a bit more here. I want it more concentrated with less water so it has better coverage. Now it's perfect. I start painting a few rocks in the water. I add a shadow. For the shadow, I don't cover everything. I leave a few small gaps because the water breaks the shadow with reflections and little ripples, so it looks more natural. I paint a bigger one here. A smaller one over here. And as the rocks go closer to the horizon, I make them smaller and lighter to match the perspective. I mix black with gray, and I start adding quick grass strokes. Quick lines in different directions, nothing is calculated here. I add a few in this area as well, and some near the trees. And remember, as we go closer to the horizon, the lines get smaller. Now I'm making a small sketch for the two trees. I'm not focusing too much on the branches, they won't be very visible because of the pine trees anyway. This is just a guide for when I add the paint later. I'm mostly interested in placing the trunks correctly. Now I'm mixing some burnt sienna with Payne's gray and a tiny bit of ivory black, and I start working on the tree. This brush feels a little too big, so I'm switching to my detail brush. I begin with the trunk and then I pull out the branches. I try to keep the lines thin and natural, I don't overthink it. I use quick strokes and I change the pressure slightly so some branches look thicker and some thinner. Now I work on the tree on the right side as well. And even if you leave a few white gaps, don't worry, later we'll add snow with white paint over the trunk and branches anyway. Now I take more ivory black, try not to use too much water so the paint has better coverage, and I start adding a bit of texture to the trunk, just small broken lines and little marks. I do the same on the branches to define them a bit more, and I repeat on the other tree as well. I add a few more grass strokes around the trees. And now my favorite part, the final details. I'm using this small brush and white acrylic paint, and I start adding snow on the branches. Little touches and small strokes mostly on the top side. I also add white at the base of the grass and on the pine trees. Honestly, it might have been easier to add the snow on the pines before painting the foreground trees, but it's okay, we can still do it now, just with a bit of patience. I add a little texture along the river edge and on our snowy hills, and I also add a touch of white on the rocks. And just a little on their shadows too. And here is the finished piece. If you painted along with me, I'd love to see it. Thank you for spending time with me, and if you painted along, tell me in the comments how it went. I'll see you next time.